There's a moment of panic as the clicker wasn't working, but it's working now. So. I want to thank you all for being here this evening. This is our study on Joshua, the Conquest. Especially want to also say thank you for those of us, those who are joining online. As I mentioned last week, I kind of, as I was reading through Joshua, just realized what an epic book it is. And I kind of wanted to see the movie or the TV show. So I started thinking about it that way in my mind. And I hope that's not disrespectful. I hold it in regard. I'm going to start sneaking this way because you guys are sitting a little far back again. We do have a man with a microphone in the back tonight. Thanks, Dana. In case someone wants to have a comment, he'll run for you. So thinking about this kind of like a mini-series, I was thinking previously on the Conquest. Last week we looked at how the baton of leadership was passed very deliberately from Moses to Joshua. It started at the end of Joshua's life as he's addressing the leaders of the next generation. And then we looked back at the first time Joshua was mentioned in the Bible as a warrior in Exodus 17. That was in the battle where Israel was prevailing as long as Moses' hands were raised up. We also looked at the succession plan that God set up. It was recounted by Moses in Deuteronomy. Here's a verse that we looked at in particular, Deuteronomy 31:23. And the Lord commissioned Joshua the son of Nun and said, "Be strong and courageous, for you shall bring the people of Israel into the land that I swore to give them. I will be with you." We see that we kind of focused on that word for a little bit, commission, that idea of not just having a rank or a title, but also a purpose, a task, a work. And that was clear here. You can see the work that Joshua was given even in this verse. He will bring the people of Israel into the promised land. So this was a succession plan that was made clear before the 40 years of wandering in the desert, because we read about this in Deuteronomy chapter 1. And then we also discussed how both Moses and Joshua were very deliberate about encouraging the people to be faithful in the future. And sadly, we saw how within one generation after Joshua that the people fell into Baal worship at the beginning of the book of Judges. This was Judges chapter 2, this, again, haunting verse. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. And we looked at passages right around the time when Joshua was commissioned, how the people of Israel were instructed to get together and have the law read to them every 7 years. And Clint pointed out also in Deuteronomy, it was supposed to be a continuous discussion, a continuous focus, a continuous teaching of their children, all about God, all about his laws. And they dropped the ball, they dropped the baton on this one. And we saw a couple of quarters ago, we saw just what disastrous consequences that had in our study on Joshua. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about a faith that saves. So when we last left off, we were in Joshua chapter 1. Go ahead and turn your Bibles to Joshua 1. We read verses 1 through 9. This is where the Lord is speaking to Joshua after the death of Moses. Remember, the book starts after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord. The Lord said to Joshua. And similarly, Judges starts after the death of Joshua. So there's a very clear time frame, very clear succession here. So it's about the year, just a reminder, it's about the year 1400 BC. Some people would put that closer to 1200, but most agree it's around 1400, 1406. And we looked at the encouragement that God gave Joshua at the beginning of the book. He said, "Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous?" This is the continual theme. Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. That's verse 9. So where are we geographically? So we're east of the Jordan River again. As a reminder from last week, Moses has gone up to Mount Nebo at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. He has died there. It's time for Joshua to take command of Israel and its armies. So Joshua is now in command in the next few verses. He's telling the people to get ready to head out to cross the Jordan. Let's look at the next couple of verses. Verse 10. And Joshua commanded the officers of the people, "Pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Okay, so they're moving out in 3 days. It's time to get ready. So before the Israelites can set off to conquer Canaan, Joshua first needs to ensure that the Transjordan tribes will join them in the fight. The Transjordan tribes are the ones east of the Jordan River. Which tribes are those? Well, the next several verses are going to deal with this. I'll just summarize them. But you have the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. So the Israelites under Moses had already conquered these lands east of the Jordan. And Joshua now commands the fighting men from these tribes to join them as they cross. Let's take a look at verse 16, at their response. And they answered Joshua, saying, all that you have done, all that you have commanded us, we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your commandment and disobey your words, whatever you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So this is a repeated theme that Joshua is hearing from all sides. He's hearing it from God. He's hearing it from the people as well. It's a repeated theme. So it's a great response from these tribes east of the Jordan. But as we're going to see later on in the book, there's going to be some tension between the Transjordan tribes and the rest of the tribes of Israel. Maybe that's a little foreshadowing. The natural geography is going to cause some division, as I guess geography will do. Any thoughts? I know we're just kind of getting started, but any thoughts before we move into chapter 2? Okay. Chapter 2, let's start by just looking at verses 1 through 7. And Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said to them, true, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. And the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. Okay, so Joshua sends out some spies. Well, why is that? He says, view the land, especially Jericho. I think we've seen that espionage, a little reconnaissance, it's always been a part of any kind of warfare. You want to gather some information about where you're going. Maybe they could start learning some of the geography. Oh yeah, Jericho is just to the right of these hills, or just across this river. I guess they already knew that one. But at the end of the chapter, as a result of this, Joshua is going to understand some of how the Canaanites are feeling. So he's going to get some insight about what's going on in Canaan. So here on the map, we see on the map on the right, the spies crossed over from Shittim to Jericho. And then later on, they're going to go into the hills to lose their pursuers. So let's talk about Jericho for a little bit. I like the illustration on the left. It's this idea of these huge, massive walls. It's a very fortified city. And yeah, it's a walled city. So when I was in high school, we used to play Age of Empires 2. You ever played a strategy game like that where you're building up your army? You realize how important a wall is. Otherwise, the bad guys just come on in and, ransack your village kind of thing. And I think today we understand this concept, but it's also very foreign to us because we don't live in walled cities anymore. And I was trying to think about this. I was trying to think, well, why not? Well, airplanes is an obvious reason why not. But they were actually already on their way out a couple hundred years before that because artillery just started getting so accurate. The point of a wall, if people can just destroy your city by, lobbing shells in there. So anyway, that was just me thinking aside about how important the walls were at this time. I think we still, even though we don't have walled cities, also because of the size of our cities, we still understand the importance of walls. It still comes up in the news when we're talking about our own borders. Also, if we think to the recent past, we think of the Berlin Wall dividing East and West Berlin. So we understand the importance of walls, and obviously that's going to come into play as we're talking about Jericho. So there are gates in the walls, and in this illustration, these spies are entering the gate. These spies, they might have encountered some guards at the gate. We were reading a fantasy book recently, and they kind of had to do this. They had to deal with the guards at the gate. Like, why are you here? What's your business? Whatever the situation was, we don't know, because verse 1 just says that they came into the house of Rahab. But it doesn't sound like they got very far, because we know that Rahab's house is built into the wall. So you don't get the impression that they were able to really scout out the city. Maybe they were. It's pure speculation. But then they got to Rahab's house. It's clear that someone knows that these men came to Rahab's house because they go and tell the king that's where they are. So there might be some, townsfolk with, curious glances over in that direction. So I will say the passage reads like they're just, looking for a place to stay. It does point out that Rahab's a prostitute, but it doesn't point out that these guys are anything but focused on the mission. So someone noticed that they came to Rahab's house because, again, it's reported to the king. So Rahab hides the spies on the roof, and then she covers for them, and she has literally covered them on the roof as well. But she covers for them and says, I didn't know where these guys came from, and we're going to find out that's not necessarily true. And I don't know where they went. And so the king's officials, they leave, and the city is shut up for the night. They close all the gates. It's like the Wonka factory. Nobody goes in, nobody goes out kind of thing. All right, let's take a look at verse 8, the next section here, because we're going to see something amazing in what Rahab has to say. So before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you to the land, and that the fear of you has taken upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that, as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, Our lives for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. So this is an incredible and it's an unexpected statement of faith, and I think it deserves attention. Rahab, first of all, says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. She believes this is going to happen. She's ready to take action because of that. She also makes it sound like the rest of the Canaanites know that this is going to happen as well. And then in verse 10, she talks about knowing what God has already done, that they had heard about the Lord drying up the Red Sea. And remember, that was 40 years earlier. She wasn't there, and her parents or her grandparents, they likely weren't there either. But someone told her about it, and she believed what had happened. We could contrast this to the faithlessness of the generation that didn't see God's works in Judges 2. Maybe they didn't tell their children, and they didn't have faith in the Lord as a result. So here on the screen we have Rahab's confession. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. She declares a belief and a faith in God, and this has to be in opposition to the gods of the Canaanites, to the Baals, the gods that are in the land, to Molech. So in the New Testament, let's turn on over to James. James uses Rahab as an example of a faith that saves. Let's go to James chapter 2. I'm going to back up a little bit to verse 14. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says that he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? And then we'll jump down to verse 24. You see that a person is justified by works, not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body, apart from the spirit, is dead, so also faith, apart from works, is dead. So there are certain biblical characters that I wish I could rebrand. There's actually now two. It used to be one. I never liked the term doubting Thomas, and I understand why, because he did doubt that Jesus was raised. But I always wanted to call him courageous Thomas, because there's an earlier passage in John chapter 11. He says, let us go with Jesus, let us go with him and die with him when Jesus goes to raise Lazarus. So I've always felt that Thomas gets a bit of a bad rap. He gets a bad reputation for that. I kind of now feel the same way for Rahab. In just about every verse, Rahab is referred to as Rahab the prostitute or Rahab the harlot, depending on your translation. And it's kind of like we, give these people the title about the worst of them. Maybe we should start rebranding Rahab as Rahab the faithful, because it's pretty amazing to see this journey of faith that she has, both in believing what she has heard, but then also understanding and taking action based on that belief, on that faith in God. Okay, any thoughts before we move on from Rahab? It's an incredible story in the book of Joshua, and let me know if you have any thoughts as we make our way back to Joshua 2. Yeah, that's a good question too. So the question for the people online is, any thoughts about her lying? I hadn't given it thought until I said something. No, I was thinking about that as I was reading through it. I guess you could say that, in the defense of someone's life, I don't know. We tend to try to weigh actions and make a trade-off, a discernment there. I don't know. I could turn that back around. Any thoughts that you would have? And now I can get Dana over there with the microphone.
I actually had someone try to tell me, based on this passage, that the end does justify the means. So,
I see.
And so you have to be careful there.
Yeah.
God can work in any circumstance,
That's true.
whether there's sin involved or whatever. And that's my only answer to that. And she did risk a great deal to hide these men.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Dana?
Yeah, on when we're talking about it earlier, and they're saying that the people are coming around saying, hey, these guys are there. I don't think this is just people in the town. I think these are other spies that are going around. So I think we're in really a clandestine type of situation there, and it's about war, it's about conquering, and I think at times of war that desperate measures come in place.
Yeah, that's a fair point too. I'm sure there's plenty of modern day examples likewise, where people have lied in service of their country or something greater. That's a tricky subject. It's certainly not for everyone. I probably wouldn't be able to do it myself with a straight face. Richard.
The scriptures record the truth of what happened there, and even though God was pleased probably with what she did in terms of her act, doesn't mean that he condones that she did.
Right.
But her act of faith was notable. The lie was not.
Right.
But nevertheless, the Bible's going to share both the good and the bad. As with anything, children are submissive to their parents. They're not always submissive to them. So the things that they do well, commendable. The things that they don't do so well is not commendable, but it doesn't mean that they haven't done good things in their life. The only person that ever sinned was Jesus.
Yeah.
Falls short.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, good discussion. That the Bible's gonna show you both the good and maybe the not so great as well. Okay, let's continue on. Let's look at verses 15 through 18. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, "Go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go your way." The men said to her, "We will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you have made us to swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household." So they give the sign of the scarlet cord. It's the cord that they're being let down through the window. And I think it's an interesting parallel as well. I don't know how it turned out that the cord was also red or scarlet, but we can think back to I naturally think backwards to the Passover and the blood on the doorpost as a sign. And in some ways, this could also look forward to the saving blood of Jesus, the fact that it's a scarlet cord. That might be reading too much into it, but it's going to be that marker that says this place is safe. All right, I'll summarize the rest of the chapter because it's basically what was already said. They depart, they go in the hills for 3 days, they lose the pursuers, then they come back. Verse 24 at the end of the chapter, "And they said to Joshua, 'Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us.'" We also keep hearing this term as well. Their hearts are melting. They're drained. They're demoralized. We can already see that the Lord's enemies are demoralized at this. Okay, so chapter 3, we come to the crossing at the Jordan. Now, we already saw in chapter 1, verse 11, that they're going to pass over the Jordan. Now that the people have set out, they've arrived at the Jordan. They stay there 3 days. We'll look at verse 5 here. "Then Joshua said to the people, 'Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you.'" And I couldn't help but think, and maybe time permitting we'll come back to this as well, but there are some people in this crowd today. There's Joshua, there's Caleb. There are a number of people who are now in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, 40s and 50s. If they're in their 60s, it would have been old. But there are people there that had been through the Red Sea crossing as children, maybe as adolescents. So this is going to actually be the second crossing for them. You have to imagine the night before this happens. Maybe they're thinking back to that time. And so Joshua talks about how this procession will work. Let's take a look at verses 6 through 13 as the Lord talks to him about it. Joshua 3:7. "The Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that you may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And as for you, command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan.' And Joshua said to the people of Israel, 'Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God.'" So God's talking to Joshua, and Joshua is faithfully then talking to the people. "And Joshua said, 'Here's how you shall know the living God is among you, and that he will drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man, and when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand up in one heap.'" So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan, with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all of its banks throughout the time of harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away, at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. And those flowing down towards the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. And the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Now the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. Okay. So I didn't get to visit the Jordan River on any of my trips to Israel. I did have a coworker that got to see it. He said it really wasn't that impressive of a river. I work with people that are in the Portland area, and they look at the Columbia. It's a much wider river. But I'm not sure what time of year my coworker went. Verse 15 describes it as the time of the harvest. This is thought to be the barley harvest in spring. And the Bible says that the Jordan was overflowing its banks. If we skip forward to 4:19, it says that this was on the 10th day of the first month. So the first month on the Hebrew calendar is going to lie somewhere in March or April. So this is when the waters are at their highest. It's at flood stage, and when the priests enter the river, they cross on dry ground. And the waters stop, and they're actually in a heap up at the city of Adam. Let's see where I'm at here. So here's a map of that area as well. Adam is, according to this map, something like 10, 15 miles away. So it's not that close. It's actually further away that the flow of the Jordan River is stopped in a heap. Okay, so everyone hurried across the Jordan. If we get into chapter 4 here, we're going to see a couple of memorials set up to remember this work. Verse 10 says the people passed over in haste. They weren't dawdling. They were moving with purpose. The ark and the priests carrying it are standing in the middle of the Jordan. And then we see an interesting sight. It says in verse 1, when all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, from each tribe of man, and command them, take 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. So you can imagine, you cross over, there's an interesting sight. You see one man called out from each tribe. They go and they speak with Joshua. They go back into the dry riverbed, and they each pick up a large stone. They then hoist on their shoulders, that's in verse 5, and they're going to carry it with them to Gilgal, where they make camp. These aren't just pebbles, these are large boulders. And this is what the Lord had commanded them to do in these verses. But let's skip down to verse 6. Why does he do this? He says that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask you in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. And I've highlighted on the screen the words to you. This is a very personal memorial. This isn't what these stones mean. What do they mean to you? It's a reminder to these people, you were here today. You need to tell your children. You need to tell their children about what you saw. So in verses 8 through 10, there's actually a second memorial that's going on here as well. So Joshua does one more thing. He also sets up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan where the priests had stood. This is an extra memorial. And I think that's interesting. It was uncommanded, but it also wasn't a bad thing. It was a good thing. It was like Joshua was trying to say, God was here. God acted here for you. It says in verse 9, he put them right where the priest had been standing with the Ark of the Covenant. He wanted to know the presence of God. It was here. So what's the result of this miracle? I was watching a superhero movie recently where someone was basically just showing off. They were just blasting explosions out on a hillside, and people were oohing and aahing. But that's not really how God works with miracles at all. He doesn't just do things to impress people. He doesn't do anything that's pointless. What was he trying to do instead? Well, I think three things we can point out here. First of all, looking at that map that we had up, the obvious reason is the same answer to the question, why the chicken crossed the road to get to the other side, right? They needed to cross the river. Strategically, it was in the way. They had to do it. Fording the river, I don't know if that was really an option at flood stage. But there were two other things that were accomplished. First of all, Joshua's leadership, again, was confirmed by God. Look at verse 14. And he said to Joshua back in 3:7, today I will begin to exalt you. In verse 14, he says, on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him, just as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. So his leadership is confirmed through this. He said this was going to happen. He said we're going to cross over in the Jordan, and he kept his word through God's, obviously through his acting. And then let's look at verses 23 and 24. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over. So the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over. So all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So this would be that they would know and fear the Lord. It's also interesting, how many times do we read it? It was at least 3 times where he said, it's the Lord of all the earth. He says that this is also so all the peoples of the earth. And it's a great tie back even to Rahab. Rahab had heard about about the account of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, and she had believed that. So this is also it's a miracle not just for the Israelites, but also for the entire world to know that the Lord is God, and he has control over nature. All right, any thoughts on that? I just kind of went through chapter 4 pretty quick here. Okay, very good. Okay, so I couldn't help but thinking as well that maybe as Joshua or the people, again, that were a little bit older, are crossing the Jordan River, that maybe, again, they're thinking back to 40 years earlier. So let's take a quick walk back down to memory lane there, and let's go to Exodus chapter 14. Because we've mentioned a couple times tonight about the Red Sea crossing. So let's take a look one more time at it. So again, Joshua at this time, he's probably 30 to 45 years old. He's in we can imagine, we can see him in our mind's eye here. He's in the Israelite camp again, but now they're in Egypt. And there's hope and there's joy in the camp. They're finally getting to leave Egypt. I personally don't often think about it. Sometimes we read the Bible and I just pick up Joshua and that's where his life begins, Joshua 1, or wherever we first read about him. Exodus 17, a couple pages later. That's when he came into existence. But Joshua is someone that was born into Egypt. He understood the oppression of his people. He lived that oppression. He witnessed the plagues. Now he's part of the Exodus. He's part of the leaving. So we're in the Israelite camp, and there's suddenly a stir in the camp. Maybe someone notices some dust out to the west. Word starts to spread through the camp like wildfire. The Egyptians are coming to kill us. Now, if this was a TV show, and it's not listed, so I'm totally speculating here, but I can only imagine we get some sort of scene with Caleb held back from rushing out to fight the Egyptians. That seems to be the kind of guy Caleb is. I don't see him cowering at this time, even though it's pure speculation. Let's take a look at Exodus 14. Let's start in verse 10. When Pharaoh drew near, people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." So Moses says that God will work for them, that he will fight for them, that he will save them today. Let's take a look at verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. Okay, so what was the result of the Red Sea crossing? Let's jump down to verse 30. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, so they feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So, quick parallel here. Similar to what we saw in the case in Joshua of the Israelites crossing the Jordan River, here we see that God's saving the Israelites from the Egyptians. Again, there's a geographic barrier they need to cross. But we also see that the Israelites fear and believe the Lord because of this. It should also be noted that this plants the seed even for belief that Rahab will have 40 years later, as she says that we have heard about this crossing as well. And then Moses' leadership is confirmed also. So it's a very similar miracle in the fact that it's referred to, but also in the results of the miracle. All right, any thoughts? Any thoughts on that as well? Dana.
I think it's interesting that he has that kind of parallel confirmation of his leadership, because before they're going in, first thing they say when they see the Egyptians is, "See, told you so, now we're all going to die. Thanks, Moses."
Yeah.
And when you go back to the leaders of the Transjordan tribe saying, "We'll obey Moses, or we'll obey you just as we did Moses," I'm thinking to myself, on Joshua, that's like a 9 out of 10 deal, you know?
Yeah.
And so Joshua probably isn't taking great comfort in that from them, but he knows these people and that there's going to be difficulties.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't want to remember how they followed Moses. Yeah, good point. Okay, so next week on the Conquest, the land now lies before the Israelites. God has promised to give them this land, but just as they enter the land, maybe off on the horizon, we can see the big walls of Jericho. So next week, we're also going to try to tackle some of that offensive material I promised would be coming. And maybe we could have a little bit of a discussion about conquest and the difficulty of the phrase devoted to destruction. Okay, so thank you again for your time this evening.